May 1940. Adolf Hitler believed he was on the edge of reshaping Europe in his favor. France was collapsing, Britain had been pushed to the edge at Dunkirk, and German command believed victory was a matter of time. But there was one variable Germany could never fully control: Benito Mussolini. On paper, Mussolini was the senior partner. He had been in power far longer, had invented his own ideology years before Hitler rose to prominence, and liked to present Italy as the second pillar of a new world order. But in reality, Berlin saw him as a man who talked like Caesar and planned like an amateur. Almost every major move Mussolini made in the conflict forced Germany to step in, patch up the damage, and redirect resources that should have been used elsewhere. His first major blunder came before Italy even fired a shot. For 9 months, Mussolini watched from a distance, unsure whether Germany would dominate or collapse. While Berlin fought Britain and France alone, Mussolini hesitated, waiting for the moment where he could join the winning side with minimal effort. Then, when France was already falling apart, he announced that Italy too was entering the conflict. But Italy wasn't ready. The army lacked vehicles, fuel, spare parts, artillery, and modern equipment. Italian generals were terrified behind the scenes. They had spent years preparing propaganda, not logistics. And so Mussolini's first move was to attack France, when France was already defeated. Italy struggled to take even small mountain positions while Germany rolled through the rest of the country with ease. The campaign gained almost nothing, but it did reveal something Berlin feared. Mussolini liked to jump into battles late, unprepared, and purely for political image. His next major disaster came only months later. Mussolini, determined to prove that Italy could conquer a region by itself, invaded Greece in October 1940. The plan was delusional. He didn't tell Hitler in advance. Italian generals warned that the timing was wrong, the weather was worsening, and Greek forces were tougher than expected. Mussolini ignored all of them. He wanted a quick victory, a shock campaign that would impress the world. What actually happened was humiliating. Greece didn't collapse. It pushed Italy back into Albania. Italian soldiers were freezing, starving, and running low on ammunition. The front became a muddy, chaotic mess. Mussolini had wanted to show independence from Hitler, and instead showed that Italy couldn't defeat a much smaller country. This blunder forced Hitler to move into the Balkans, something he desperately wanted to avoid. Germany needed the spring of 1941 to prepare for the biggest operation in its military history, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Instead, Hitler had to redirect troops, armor, and aircraft south to rescue Mussolini's failing campaign. The German invasion of Yugoslavia and Greece delayed Operation Barbarossa by weeks, and those weeks mattered. Soldiers later recalled that the delay pushed the final phases of the Eastern Campaign into the brutal early winter, turning what might have been an advance into a slow, freezing struggle. All because Mussolini couldn't admit he wasn't ready for Greece. Around the same time, Mussolini made another disastrous decision. He wanted Italy to control the Mediterranean. He believed the British fleet would crumble quickly. But Italy's navy, although large, was poorly coordinated and lacked radar. Italian pilots had trouble coordinating with naval vessels, and fuel shortages meant that ships often stayed in port rather than risking open water. Mussolini's dream of dominating the Mediterranean soon slipped away. The British struck the Italian fleet at Taranto with a daring nighttime attack, crippling battleships that Mussolini believed were untouchable. The blow shocked naval strategists worldwide and even inspired Japan's later thinking about attacking Pearl Harbor. From Berlin's perspective, the Mediterranean situation was becoming a drain. Italy's losses forced Germany to send air units to Sicily, Crete, and North Africa to stabilize the region. And that brings us to the next, and most famous, blunder: North Africa. Italy attempted to invade Egypt in 1940, believing British defenses were weak. But Mussolini again ignored his commanders, rushed preparations, and underestimated everything. Italian forces advanced a short distance into Egypt, then stopped. Supplies ran out, morale collapsed, and British forces counterattacked with speed and precision. The Italians lost tens of thousands of soldiers and massive amounts of equipment, retreating all the way across Libya. It became another crisis Hitler could not ignore. So he sent in one of his best commanders, Erwin Rommel. The Afrika Korps was meant to be a small defensive force, but Rommel pushed far beyond that, launching bold advances that stunned the British. Germany had effectively taken over Italy's theater of operations. Mussolini smiled for the cameras and claimed success. But behind closed doors, German officers complained that they were now fighting a campaign they never planned. one triggered by Italy's poor preparation and overconfidence. A quick sub-reminder. If you're enjoying this deep dive style, tap subscribe. It helps more than you think. While Africa, Greece, and the Mediterranean spiraled, Mussolini was making more catastrophic decisions at home. Italy's industrial output couldn't match its ambitions. Fuel was scarce. Tanks were outdated. Aircraft were underpowered. And Mussolini kept promising Hitler that Italy was moments away from turning things around. But Berlin saw the truth. Italy was draining German strength. Even Italian morale was eating away at the alliance. After defeats in Greece and Egypt, confidence in Mussolini dropped sharply. German diplomats wrote back to Berlin noting that Italians were openly blaming Mussolini for dragging their country into a conflict they weren't equipped to handle. Hitler recognized this and grew increasingly frustrated, referring to Mussolini as unreliable in private meetings. One of Mussolini's most overlooked blunders was his refusal to stabilize the Balkans politically. German commanders needed the region calm to protect supply routes, but Mussolini's invasion of Greece triggered chain reactions. Yugoslavia fell into chaos. Resistance movements expanded. Germany had to deploy divisions across the Balkans, tying down troops that were desperately needed on the Eastern Front. German high command repeatedly told Hitler that they were wasting soldiers on missions that served Italy's ego more than strategic necessity. Then came 1942, when the Eastern Front was absorbing almost all of Germany's energy. Mussolini insisted on sending Italian divisions to fight in the Soviet Union, not because Italy could make a decisive difference, but because Mussolini feared being excluded from any future victory. German generals tried to warn him that Italy's equipment wasn't suited for the freezing climate, but Mussolini wanted prestige, not practicality. The result was tragic. Italian units stationed along the Don River were hit by massive Soviet counterattacks during the winter. They were undertrained for the conditions and lacked proper winter gear. While many fought with incredible bravery, they were overwhelmed. Germany again had to redirect units to prevent the collapse of the entire front. Hitler was furious behind the scenes, not at the soldiers themselves, but at Mussolini's repeated habit of making political decisions that placed unrealistic burdens on his army, which then became Germany's burdens. Meanwhile, in North Africa, the situation deteriorated. Rommel was supposed to stabilize the region, but his successes tempted Mussolini to push deeper. Italy pressured Germany to take Egypt, the Suez Canal, and beyond. But none of this aligned with Germany's strategic priorities. Berlin wanted a small, cost-controlled presence. Mussolini wanted symbolic victories. The constant back and forth turned North Africa into a drain of tanks, fuel, aircraft, and manpower. All during the year, Germany needed every resource for the Eastern Front. By 1943, Mussolini's poor leadership reached its breaking point. The Allies prepared to land in Sicily. Italian defenses were weak, undermanned, and poorly coordinated. Mussolini had been warned for months that Sicily was vulnerable. Reports from Italian generals said the same thing. The island needed reinforcements, fortifications, and updated equipment. Mussolini ignored the warnings, insisting that the Allies would never attempt a large landing so far into the Mediterranean. When the Allies arrived, Italian resistance was scattered and inconsistent. Many units, undersupplied and demoralized, couldn't hold the line. Hitler had to rush German divisions to Sicily to support the collapsing defense. But even German forces struggled to contain the Allied advance. Hitler viewed the entire crisis as the final confirmation. Mussolini had built a giant empire of illusions, not strength. As Sicily fell, the Italian government lost faith. Mussolini was removed from power and arrested. Italy secretly negotiated with the Allies. Hitler was stunned, not because Mussolini fell, but because the Italian government switched allegiance without warning. It was the ultimate betrayal in Hitler's eyes. Germany suddenly had to occupy Italy, disarm Italian troops, and fight both the Allies and resistance groups across the peninsula. Germany froze divisions that were desperately needed on the Eastern Front and moved them to Italy, slowing operations elsewhere and worsening Germany's overall strategic position. Mussolini's collapse didn't just weaken Italy, it actively undermined Germany's entire war plan. Hitler rescued Mussolini from captivity and set him up as the leader of a puppet regime in northern Italy, but this only created more problems. The region descended into internal conflict. Partisans gained strength, supply lines were constantly threatened. German officers privately wrote that keeping Mussolini in power required more effort than it was worth. From Berlin's perspective, Mussolini had become a symbol of instability. Every campaign he touched turned into something Germany had to fix. Every ambition he had required German firepower. Every defeat he suffered pulled Germany deeper into regions it didn't want to control. The truth is that Mussolini's biggest blunder wasn't a specific battle or campaign. It was his belief that Italy could fight on the same scale as Germany, without the industry, training, or strategic planning to support it. He chased prestige, not practicality. He entered conflicts for image, not strategy. And every time reality hit him, he expected Hitler to clean up the mess. Hitler once said privately that if he had known the true state of Italy's military, he never would have formed an alliance. And many German generals later remarked that Italy's failures shortened Germany's chances by dividing resources into too many pointless directions. In the end, Mussolini's legacy inside the conflict is two-sided. To his own propaganda, he was the leader of a revived empire. But to German command, he was a constant source of costly emergencies, a leader whose ambitions far exceeded his capabilities and whose misjudgments forced Germany into theaters it never planned to fight. Italy's defeat in Greece, Italy's collapse in North Africa, the disaster on the Don River, the failure to defend Sicily, the political implosion that forced Germany to occupy its own ally. Each moment shaped the larger war not because of Italian strength, but because of Mussolini's overconfidence, and because Germany had to step in to manage the consequences. If you're enjoying these deep dives into leadership failures and behind-the-scenes decision-making, make sure to hit subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel grow. What would you like covered next?